Hello and welcome to another episode of Just Onside. And as always, I've got the main man, Owis, who's climbing up the table in the Fantasy League. He's in the top. So where are you now, Owis?
I've not actually checked. I think I had an okay week, continuing on with the recent fall. 11th maybe in the Just Onside League. So yeah, still steady, but still a bit of ground to make up. I think the person who's leading is about 40 points away. How about yourself? Good week?
Awful week. So let's not discuss. And you had an excellent shout in Ketia. I
Yeah,
believe he scored a hat trick. Was it a hat trick that he scored?
he did score a hat trick. I mean, the only reason I tend not to get Arsenal players is because I just don't want to jinx it too much. I always maybe perhaps a bit more skeptical about Arsenal than most. But yeah, I fancied him to start, and it was against currently, I guess, the worst team in the Premier League, so it did make sense. But yeah, hat trick. But I mean, your dead cert was. I also picked Salah as a dead cert, so both my dead certs picked up points. But your dead cert was Haaland to get 4 goals. And to be honest, I laughed at the time, but you weren't too far off, to be fair.
Well, halfway there. And it wasn't quite a mauling of Manchester United, but that leads us on very nicely onto the main subject that we're going to discuss. It was Manchester United and Man City, obviously the game. Talk about the game, but then more so what's happening at Manchester United. It's been a story that's been rumbling for a little while. There appears to be some disquiet coming out of Old Trafford. And we've talked about this many times that initially we did say that Ten Hag was an excellent appointment. He was doing a really good job, but over recent months there are question marks about his management style. What he's done, is it working? Is it effective? Is there player grumblings at Old Trafford? So firstly, always the game. How did you see the game?
Well, firstly, Ayub, I think it should be noted you've shown incredible self-restraint not to talk about Leeds' thumping win over the weekend. Signs of maturity, I'm all for it. But no, that's that by the by with Leeds' win.
Thank you so much for mentioning it.
Absolutely. Comfortable win at that as well. Done and dusted at halftime, pretty much.
It was, yeah.
But right, getting on to more important matters, Ayub. Apologies. Yeah, United. I mean, let's talk about the game first. You're right. Let's just cover the game because I think the story wasn't so much the game. It's, I guess, the fallout there afterwards in terms of what this result represented, right? Whenever you go up against your rivals, especially when those rivals are the talk of town, they are the best team in Europe, they are the class of the European kind of level and elite, which they are after winning the treble. It's always, I guess, a game where a lot of kind of it sets the barometer, right? It sets the marker about where you stand in terms of, because that's the team that everyone's chasing, right? They've got so much equity, Manchester City have, that even when they fall maybe 3 points, 4 points, 5 points behind in the title race, many still feel that they are favourites to get their hands on the Premier League trophy. And I would agree with that. They've come through time and time again. I think it's clear in terms of the game itself, there was some talk. I mean, Manchester United started okay. And when I say started, I'm talking about literally the first 5, maybe 10 minutes. But it became very evident very quickly that once Manchester City settled, the kind of state of the game and the pattern had been forged. Manchester City incredibly comfortable in possession. And to be fair, many of their players, I thought, genuinely were at their highest level yesterday. When I say highest, they had a couple, especially their midfield. It was functioning so well yesterday. Bernardo, Foden, Grealish, Stones, and Rodri. I mean, to think you've got Kevin De Bruyne to go into that, you've got Alvarez and what have you. So there's a lot of, in terms of it functioning, everyone knowing where to be, one pass, one touch, two touch, angles, where to run into, where to move it to, just efficiency. I mean, it was a thing of beauty for the most part. And in terms of the game itself, Ayub, I thought once those patterns had been forged, City were getting in behind, they were getting the overlaps on the side, if you remember, with Bernardo kind of being given the freedom of Old Trafford. I guess the game, turned a little bit on that first goal, right, in terms of whether it was a penalty. I do want to get your quick thoughts. So I will give you the floor on this one, Ayub. In my opinion, I think it's soft. Genuinely, I thought that at the time. I'm a person who generally has a high threshold for penalties. And what really irks me sometimes is the justification that many ex-referees give for when these penalties are awarded, because it's the same justification you could use for arguing the opposite. And I'll give you an example. So, do I think it was a foul? Yeah, of course it was. Yeah, I mean he's had a little shove, but we've seen that. If you watch Martin Odegaard in every single defensive corner, he's never looking at the ball. He's looking at the player. He's normally got his arms wrapped around the player. I say wrapped, but he's always got some hold of him, of whoever he's marking. And it is a cliche, but it's so true. You don't see
Yeah.
those being given consistently. And from my perspective, do I think he's, I guess, in a panic? Just kind of held Rodri a little. Yes. Do I think it was an elongated grab? No. Do I think Rodri's exaggerated it? For sure. You just don't see too many of those given. I'd understand if he's absolutely kind of grabbed him to a point where Rodri's genuinely trying to get to the ball, but can't because of the shirt pull or being impeded by the opposition player. I don't think this was one of those, because I just think if you're giving those, you better give a lot more. Then I'm going to be, really striving for consistency. And I just don't think it actually met the threshold for what we see in these corner situations, or set piece situations, I should say, for being given as a penalty. What do you think?
Absolutely, I agree. If they're going to give that, then there has to be consistency, which is always going to be the problem, because it's not going to happen. We've all played football. I still sort of maintain it's a contact sport. I think it's a myth somehow. Sort of, some people believing it's a non-contact sport. There is physicality. People there's a little tug. I mean, there has to be some sort of tolerance set, and I think this is the problem, because where are you going to set the tolerance? Because you're just allowing opportunists, and that's what I consider forward attacking players, or people who are looking for penalties. They're opportunists because they know that the rules are such that minimal contact, and they'll go down. And then, unfortunately, referees, very few have ever played football at any level, let alone top level. So I agree. I think in the current climate, yes, it's soft, but I suppose if you go by the absolute letter of the law, it's a penalty. But what I want to see is week in, week out, that given then. If that's the precedence that you set, then it has to be consistent. And therein always lies the problem, that it's not going to be consistent. You know that there's going to be an absolute similar challenge that's not going to be given a penalty. And that's the problem.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, the second half showed that when you had the incident between Haaland and Maguire. Now, Dermot Gallagher today on Ref Watch suggested that that was 6 of one, half a dozen of another, but I didn't actually see it that way. Haaland clearly splits the ball out and then wants to make an attacking run into the box, and Maguire's kind of shielding him from it, and then kind of hurls him to the ground. I mean, again, Højlund does not grab him long enough for me in terms of or kind of crossing that threshold. We all know, to your point, we've all played, we've all watched enough. We know what that threshold looks like. And many a player has been given a lot of leeway, let's say, when you kind of grab and let go, let's say.
Yeah.
And what this does, I think, is it gives attacking players too much incentive, because, again, you're going to end up with a penalty situation. Now, do I think Rodri could have got a head onto the ball? Perhaps. I mean, it was within his vicinity, potentially, in terms of where he was running into. But ultimately, he's exaggerated the fall. And the problem I have is that if that wasn't given, and remember, it wasn't given on the field, right? So VAR, Michael Oliver intervened to give it. I promise you, if that wasn't given, even on VAR, the ex-referees would be sat here and saying, yeah, he's grabbed him, but he's not really met that threshold. It's not clear. It's not clear he's going to make a play for the ball and what have you. It's just, they'll justify it depending on what the decision has been made. Anyway, the point is, I thought it was soft. I thought it was harsh. Do I think in any way that would have ended up affecting the result? The first goal's always key, isn't it, Ayub? But I don't think, because of the chasm between the two sides yesterday, that would have affected the result. City looked threatening. But once they got into their rhythm, they really did look threatening. They had an XG of 3.93, the second highest of any Premier League team this season in any game. The first was Brighton against Luton when they beat them 4-1 earlier this season with an XG of 4.01. So it just goes to show City were plenty kind of justified and plenty good for that result. Dominant. I don't think United had much. Yes, they had a few situations in the first half, but once that second goal goes in, and an incredible move at that as well. Some of the football from Man City yesterday, and that's what I mean. That Man City is the best team in the league. In terms of the way they move the ball with purpose. And that was the key difference, wasn't it, you? What you saw at Emirates was a team that was a little kind of, and I agree Rodri wasn't there, but it was a team that was a little kind of circumspect, conservative, very watchful and respectful. Perhaps, I mean, maybe that shows that Arsenal have come a long way as well. But yesterday was as though they felt we've got plenty for these lot, and it clearly showed. Their passing had a purpose. There were lots of overlaps. Getting to the byline, that's always the sign for me. When you're getting to the byline against teams, you know you've got the better of them. And again, if it wasn't for a few incredible saves from Onana and a few other situations, I think your Haaland pick of focals could really genuinely have come true. So on the game itself, we'll come on to the larger picture because I think that's more important. But I think in terms of the game, it laid bare for Manchester United and Manchester United supporters the gulfing class that exists between Man City and Man United. And yes, they are the best team in Europe. But perhaps for me, what the most disappointing thing, and I'll cover it in my second stanza, is the sheer kind of lack of application and commitment to kind of suffer and pull out a result. And that maybe is a sign of other underlying issues at hand. The fact that there wasn't that kind of, right, break us down. Even at 1-0 at half-time, Ayub, and I'll end on this, you thought, right, we've got away with it. It's still 1-0. Onana's made a great save. Haaland should score, but he's made a great save just before half-time. Right, we're going to settle in. We're going to kind of get men behind the ball. We're going to make it incredibly difficult for them to get runners off, and we'll always get some opportunities. It's Old Trafford. You're going to get one or two opportunities. I'm not saying that should be a steady diet for their general way of playing, but against Man City, sometimes you just got to respect the opposition that you're playing against. So the fact that wasn't their approach, and the substitution he made at halftime made it also quite difficult, I felt. I was quite surprised, and I think that would be the most disappointing thing if I'm a Manchester United supporter. The fact that it was as though there was an acceptance that we can't really get anywhere near this team. And I think at the bare minimum, what you're looking for is application, commitment, and just, right, we're not giving you anything cheap. We're not giving you anything easy. And for me, still, there were way too many gaps on that pitch for Man City to take advantage of. So City were well good for that 3-0 win. Could have been many more. And I think, let's see on our second stanza when we discuss the larger picture. How did you see the game? Are you similar?
I'm really comfortable. Absolutely, yeah. You've covered each and every point. It was a really, really comfortable, and you alluded to it. It probably should have been more. I mean, I sort of half jokingly, obviously, I sort of said Haaland was going to score 4 goals, but there was a part of me that was very, very sort of confident that possibly it could happen. United have been poor for large portions of the season. They've been extremely poor, very fortunate with some of the results that they've had. And I just thought there's absolutely no way they're going to get any fortune. I think they can get away with maybe Wolves. They can get away with Brentford. There's absolutely no chance that you can be lucky and get a result against Manchester City. And it was never going to happen. And I really did think that City were going to put them to the sword. And to a certain extent, they did. I think on another day, they would have won with even more of a convincing result. So I think United should not in any way feel hard done by. I think that first goal, you're right, sometimes it is pivotal. It wouldn't have made any difference. If that hadn't been given a penalty, they would have scored. It was inevitable. It was a goal was always going to happen, and it was always going to go to City. I think even if Man United scored, City was going to score far more goals than Man United. So problems at United, they're not a good side at this moment in time. I really do not think they're a good side at this moment in time. There are lots of issues, which is obviously what we're going to discuss now. So what do you think the problems are? Because this is something which just, it's sort of week in, week out. They'll get a result and maybe that sort of papers over the cracks. But really, I think somebody at some stage needs to really address what's happening at Old Trafford at this moment in time, because I think there are fundamental problems at Old Trafford. I don't think Ten Hag has addressed these. I mean, we had the issue at the start of the season with quite sort of poor in the way that they dealt with David De Gea, a loyal servant of many, many years. And I think that's quite symptomatic of what's happening at Old Trafford at this moment in time, that it seems to be a club. It's a rudderless club. It's a club that seems to have no direction. So what do you think? What?
This is Eric Ten Hag's. This is the most difficult period of his. I mean, it's an understatement, but this is the most difficult period that he's had whilst manager and coach of Manchester United Football Club. Last year, he did really well, and I think he deservedly got the plaudits. This year has been a real challenge. I mean, they've lost 5 of their opening 10 Premier League games, Ayub. Last time they did that was in 1986-87. Look at the 5 games they've won, Ayub, and let's just go through them. Wolves, Burnley, Brentford, Forest, and Sheffield United. That's not a murderer's row of opponents. And then when you think about each of those games, Wolves, we've spoken about it to death. It was a game where Wolves were the better team at Old Trafford, opening weekend of the Premier League. You want to set the tone. A good, solid performance can set the tone of the season. Wolves were the better team, should have had a penalty at the end with a chance to potentially getting a draw. Burnley, Amdouni has that chance, hits the post. United come away with a 1-0 win. But, it was a fairly turgid affair, and Burnley could easily have got in front. Brentford, you're needing goals in the 93rd, 97th minute from Scott McTominay to reverse a potential home defeat at Old Trafford. Forest, 2-0 down after 5 minutes. Again, fortunate to get a penalty in that game, in my opinion, on Rashford, and you're able just about to reverse the result. 3-2, especially with Forest having gone down to 10 men kind of halfway through the second half as well. And then Sheffield United, a team that Newcastle pumped 8-0, was it? Arsenal pumped them 5-0. They don't have any wins, and United just about sneaked through with a goal, I think, around the 75th minute, a fantastic goal by Diogo Dalot. All of their 5 wins this season, there have been question marks. All 5 of those wins in the league, Ayub, have come with a 1-goal swing. So it's been a narrow victory. And they've got obviously challenging fixtures to come on and what have you. But I always say, and what one of my favorite phrases, you kind of feed a man a fish, you feed him for a day, teach him how to fish, and you feed him for a lifetime. And the reason why I mention that is because consistently, and Jamie Carragher spoke about it, he talked about this kind of underdog style football. If you don't forge a consistent way of playing over time under the most intense pressure, especially when there's when you're coming up against opponents who understand how best to negate some of your strengths, what's going to come through in those times is the kind of style that you forge, the repetition, the patterns, and what have you. You watch Manchester United trying to build from the back. Yes, there's some mitigating factors, but again, we'll come on to those with injuries and players being unavailable. But for me, if you just look, I would say that's one of the biggest issues they had. So even last year when they were winning cups and getting to the finals of cups, the argument I was having is how many games can you say genuinely that they were comfortably the better team? Because over time, those low of averages always bear themselves out, in my opinion. You have to forge a clear identity, which means every now and again, you've got to get unlucky. You'll come across a team, you'll absolutely batter them, but you'll come unstuck because that's the game of football. And I think you can live with that to some extent because you'd say, well, if we play like that more times than not, good results will follow. In terms of Eric Ten Hag, Ayub, he had, again, a fairly he was given a lot of praise for last year, and I think deservedly so. I think this year, if you're asking what the number one issue is, I'd say again the lack of forging a clear identity. And what goes hand in hand with that is the players that you select, right? The players that you purchase and recruit. There's been a lot made of the fact that a high percentage of players that are from the Dutch league or players that he's worked with previously, but none of them have really worked out, Ayub. I mean, you've got the goalkeeper who's currently still got question marks. You saw his save in the first half, the one just before halftime from Haaland's header, great. But the save from Foden, that could have gone horribly wrong. I don't know what he was doing, kind of saving that and passing it up into the air. Even I would argue the Rodri shot, he's just parried it straight to Haaland, who's then squared it for Foden's tap in. So there's question marks at goalkeeper. You've had to change position there. Luke Shaw's been unavailable and injured. Malathi has been injured and unavailable. Martinez has missed some time. Varane's missed some time. You've had to play Evans and Maguire yesterday. I mean, that just felt like it was never going to work. Right back, you've had a lot of issues. So there's been a complete disarray at the back. Then in the middle, you've got Casemiro with suspensions and with injuries and what have you. And he's not been great this season. Is it a question of him finally, his legs going or not quite having the form that you need? You need him to be a world-class defensive midfielder, and he's absolutely not been that this season. Amrabat, you bring him in, is he cut out for it? Let's see, time will tell. Mason Mount, the question marks about where does he fit into this Man United, the old adage, he's good at a few things. What's he absolutely great at? Nobody could really answer. He's not settled in. He's had a few injuries as well. And then up front, Rashford's out of form. Højlund's toiling. But again, with no real service. And then on the other side, it's been an absolute shambles with regards to the other wing. You've got this ongoing saga with Sancho. You've got the situation, obviously, a few off-the-field issues with Anthony. He came on yesterday and did not do himself any favours with some of his antics on the pitch. But the fact is, for me at Manchester United, if I was a Man United fan, genuinely, I'd be really worried, because at the moment there's no hope and there's no confidence that they're starting to put something in place that's going to get this right. All teams go through difficult times, Ayub. Believe me, Arsenal were irrelevant for many years, maybe the last few years of Wenger and even afterwards, right? Under Emery for a short while, under Arteta's early years. But I always felt with Arteta, and I think most observers did, that he's slowly starting to, once he's able to recruit accordingly, and have Arsenal spent a significant amount of money? They absolutely have. But other than maybe one or two, you'd say a lot of the signings with Arteta, I can see what he's doing. Right, yeah, I get it. And there's a few question marks in there. There are, absolutely. Havertz, you'd question. Raya, you'd question. But on the whole, the club, top to bottom, is kind of designed to try and achieve some semblance of success. And Arsenal are relative again. So I think from a United's perspective, the most worrying thing for me on the pitch yesterday was no real idea how to combat Man City. That's a worry. At the bare minimum, all you want to see is that application, that endeavour to say, right, today we're going to keep it tight. We're not going to make it easy. Yes, at Old Trafford, that's always a challenge, but we're playing the best team in Europe. So be it. You've got to sacrifice some of your values. And that halftime change as well, it didn't really work. And City found it way too easy, Ayub. That was way too easy. And from my perspective, I'm not sure how much better it gets to be 10 games into the Premier League, not to have one decent performance, Ayub. We're nearly in November. The clocks have gone back. And not to have one decent performance. Against Copenhagen, they needed a penalty save to just about stay alive with their Champions League hopes of qualifying for the knockout rounds. But who cares? If they play like this, they'll get bounced at the last 16 if they make it through to the quarters. I mean, what you're looking for is show me some semblance of improvement. And I don't think he should pay with his job. I really don't. But I do think if this is not reversed, and if the season ends the way the first 3 months have gone, let's say, then I think there will be some question marks asked in the summer. And the biggest worry, and I'll finish on this, Ayub, is all of a sudden, I think, obviously I can't prove this. I read the stories, I read the kind of analysis coming out of the club and some of the noises about obviously Radcliffe coming in, taking over the kind of sporting side of things. And there's some talk about how some of the staff will be moved on and there'll be a whole new kind of football. And yeah, that would maybe perhaps affect kind of the nucleus of the think tank, let's say, on the sporting side. But it just seems to me as though Erik ten Hag's also searching for something and he's not quite sure and he doesn't quite have the conviction of his ideas right now. He got Amrabat in as a last minute. He made that signing of Anthony. He's not worked out in any way, shape or form. He's had to bring back Maguire. He's had to bring back McTominay, two players who he wanted to get rid of in the summer, to have to give Evans a 1-year deal and he's playing quite a number of games. It just feels like he's also losing his way a little bit. And you saw some of his substitutions yesterday. Again, they made the team worse in terms of performances, which is not what was happening last season. So the worry is that the manager's also losing a little bit of that, I wouldn't call it a Midas touch, but just losing a little bit of conviction in his ideas. And clearly, at this stage, Ayub, the product on the pitch ultimately is a representation of the manager. And if yesterday was anything to go off, clearly his ideas are not getting through to those group of players. So that would be my biggest worry. That is the manager also feeling a little disillusioned and disenchanted with the size of the task here. So honestly, there's nothing really that we can point to with Manchester United that would suggest cause for optimism, at least from what I saw yesterday. Even if they'd lost yesterday, but were committed, were kind of working hard, making it hard as possible for Man City to get that win, then I would have said, you know what, there's something to build on there. But to be in November and not to have one decent performance, maybe Palace in the Carabao Cup aside, that's pretty shameful for a club that at the start of the season would have had designs at least on challenging for the Premier League title.
Well summarised. And I think the important point that you raised was the fact that they've won 5 games, but they've certainly not been convincing. I mean, I thought last year the platform was set. I mean, they'd won a couple of trophies, so obviously it seemed as if a corner had been turned. You wouldn't have said that, right, this is a year where potentially they can go on and win the league, but certainly they were looking at improving, looking at perhaps finishing or challenging at least challenging, being serious challengers. But I just from the outside, not as a United fan, just from the outside, it just looks at the moment that there are too many players unhappy. You talked about even even if you lose, there's a way of losing a game of football. It seems to be individuals rather than the team. There seems to be a lack of camaraderie. I mean, there may be, but certainly it doesn't look like it. And if there was, you'd probably be seeing better performances. So at the moment, there's Anthony, Greenwood. I mean, even De Gea. Last year there was Ronaldo. It just seems to be. I don't know what type of coach this guy is. I don't know what his man management skills are. He's obviously brought some players that he's worked with before. Now, normally that tends to be quite a safe way of coaching, that you bring players that you trust, you know exactly what they're capable of, but it nothing seems to be working for this guy. I mean, we've got players that, I mean, Rashford, go back 4 years, 5 years, he was the next best thing. He was somebody that had the world at his feet. I have my own reasons and theories as to why his career has perhaps stagnated, because I think he just became show business. That's the thing, you see. When he came, it was almost as if the only thing that mattered was football. Now I think he's embraced the celebrity lifestyle. You look at the way that he is. He's full of tattoos. He's got funky haircuts. Now that wouldn't automatically. That's not something that I would always say that, right, because he's got a funky haircut, he's got tattoos. It's affected his game. But it's always this. I mean, I always use Stevie G as an example. The man had the same haircut for 20 years. I mean, but he was always the only thing that he ever bothered about was football and his family. That was it. You seldom heard stories of Stevie G. Maybe obviously it did. He grew up at a time or played at a time where there was a drinking culture. But what you see with a lot of modern players is that there's too many distractions. Rashford had all the tools to be one of the best players in the world. I've got to be honest, he looks at times average, very average. He's still got the speed, but he looks very average, very ordinary. Anthony, 80 million. I'm still waiting to see what the 80 million was for. You've got McTominay. You talked about Scott McTominay and Harry Maguire. These were players who obviously he was trying to push out. What must be their mindset? Now, some players react well. Right, okay, you wanted to force me out. I'm going to show you. But it must have repercussions. It must have an effect, because Sancho as well. He obviously must have close friends within the club. Now, they must be upset as well with the way that he's been treated. So Greenwood as well. I think Greenwood. I still maintain that the club did the wrong thing. That their decision was affected by public opinion. The club should be strong enough to be able to decide what it wants to do. If it means going against public opinion, so be it. But they actually were hedging their bets. Right, we'll bring him in. Oh, hang on. The public seem not to be too keen on this idea, so we'll pull it. That is awful, an awful way of running a football club. So I think there are systematic issues at Manchester United. I think I once sort of said that Ten Hag has lost the dressing room, but I'm absolutely convinced that he's not got the buy-in from every single individual. also in terms of due diligence, when you buy players for Manchester United, they have to have a certain character. I mean, we go back 20 years, 25 years. We go back to the Keane era. I know, obviously, it's a golden era. You had the likes of Pallister, Stevie Bruce. You had Roy Keane. These guys were leaders. You didn't need a coach. These guys would make sure that everybody on that field towed the party line. Then after them, you had the likes of Lineker, Vidic. They had characters who were leaders. Winning meant everything to these individuals, and they would leave nothing behind on the pitch. You see these players. I don't see that at all.
Yeah, and I think well said. Ayub. And the worry is, and Jamie Carragher coined it yesterday, and I thought it was a smart phrase. He called it joined up thinking, and that's what's missing at Manchester United. I mean, to your point about Mason Greenwood, wherever you stand on that issue, Manchester United were taking steps to bring him back, and then it was the initial public reaction and furore from inside the walls, but also outside, that made them change their mind at the last minute. So that's symptomatic of what Manchester United are right now, which is this: they're not the best in class in terms of football clubs. They keep perpetuating this idea that they are the biggest club in the world, but that for me is just kind of jargon that we throw around to make us feel good about ourselves. If you look at what the current situation is, and some may want to hold on to it, that Man City will never be a bigger club than Man United, fine. But as of this decade, let's say, at least that's the last decade that I've been following football, it's been Man City's last 10 years, and United have been an afterthought. And that's what matters in the end. What is happening currently? You can't always just be forever hanging on to what your name is or what it represents. That might give you kind of commercial prowess and clout, let's say, and you get a seat at the big table. And Man United will have that. But what does that mean? I mean, the fact is, we follow the game, you and I, and millions around the world for following our club. The fandom is that results, performances, kind of direction. And going back to what Carragher said, and this is what I mean about, you asked the question, what's going wrong? How do they fix it? I genuinely don't know, because there's a myriad of issues. And this isn't quite an easy fix. If I saw Erik ten Hag losing games, but I thought, I can see what he's trying. I think once the injuries settle, but there's so many issues because of, to your point, there's recruitment where you bring in a Casemiro on 4 years, 5 years, whatever it may be, given his kind of advanced age, and then you bring in an Amrabat, but then you've got Ericsson on your books, you've got then Mason Mount brought in with Amrabat, so you're thinking, well, what's the idea? I can tell you right now, pretty much dead cert, in terms of where Arsenal's next expenditure will be, because I can see how he's done the squad. He's brought depth at the back, quality depth at the back, and see where he's at with the forward positions. I can see what he's doing in the middle of the park. There's as soon as you can understand, you don't need a club to explain. But a well-run club, you never need them to explain some of the decisions they're making, because it's self-evident. Their actions will speak louder than their words. And right now with United, I look at it and I think, what are they doing? What are they building? What's the patterns? What's the idea? They're not a quick team, but they're not a great possession team. They're not a very good defensive team, but then their strikers often struggle because they're not a team that's conducive to creating great opportunities. I think I read that in terms of clear-cut chances, Ayub, they're only above 9 other Premier League teams. So that puts them mid-table mediocrity, and they've probably got a few more points, like we discussed, than they should have. So they're not a team that's creating lots of opportunities, let's say like a Chelsea, even an Everton, or perhaps one of the more profligate teams. But say Chelsea, for example, it was only this weekend the first time when another team, e.g. Brentford in this case, had a higher XG than them. So the fact is, there's so many issues there. I wouldn't genuinely know where to start. I still think you have to persevere with the manager. And I think slowly but surely, if I was to suggest one thing that I think he really needs to start thinking about, because this season and the finish to this season, we're not even halfway, nowhere near, is what will determine whether or not he obviously continues, is to start really finding out who are the right players and the right personnel for this kind of first 11, and persevere as much as possible. And I'm okay with his stance on the Sancho thing. You're right. There's question marks because of everything else that's happened, but I'm okay with it because Sancho hasn't earned the right ultimately to have, let's say, a bit of leeway given his way. He's not performed. If he's causing a few issues, happy for him to be removed from the club setup. But he really needs to establish himself in terms of Erik ten Hag, that is, in terms of the players he can trust. And what I mean by trust is not just from a playing side, but to your point about leadership, commitment, players who are not going to go hiding when the going gets tough. And I think they just need to start kind of thinking about that and thinking, right, this player might not be as good as the next one, but I pretty much know what I'm going to get in terms of the commitment, in terms of listening to the ideas and trying to bring those ideas on the pitch. Honestly, they've got so many issues. And for a big club, supposed big club, they are, again, I would argue that they are ahead in the league of where they should be based on performances. Whereas if you look at all the other teams, or I say, if you look at the table from 1 to 20, you pretty much say, for the most part, many of the teams are where they need to be. For example, if you look at the top of the table, Spurs deservedly are top of the table. But United, I think, are 8th. I'll have to double check that. I would argue that's probably a few places higher than they should be if you look at some of the points that they've managed to miraculously get. So in the end, I think a big job for Erik ten Hag. I wouldn't consider, I don't know what your thoughts are, and I will ask you, I don't think there's any consideration in terms of him being removed from his job. Absolutely not. However, if this form continues, I think they would make a change in the summer, because I just think he'll also be quite worn out in terms of, if this continues, this kind of lack of performances, the crowd will vote with their feet, with their boos and with their protests. So I think if it doesn't improve quickly, it could get ugly. So I think any decision has to be delayed till the summer. And I think in the meantime, Erik ten Hag needs somehow a bit of a resurgence in these last kind of 28 games.
I agree. I don't think it's going to happen this season. But you're absolutely right. I think if there's no significant improvement in the way that United are performing, then, and rightly so, his job has to be on the line, because ultimately when you talked about it, we always talk about United as being a massive football club, a huge global brand, and ultimately its fans and the club crave success. Albeit there was some success, yes, last season, but certainly this season it seems to be a club absolutely. There is no direction. There is absolutely no direction, or at least a clear direction where the club's going. So certainly, you're right. I don't think so. I think even if the performances don't improve until January, the club are not going to make that decision. I'd be amazed if they did. But there is obviously always a time where a decision has to be made. If he's not performing, then maybe they will look elsewhere. But that's enough about United. That's our thoughts. I know there's a number of United fans who obviously regularly watch our show, so we're intrigued to find out what your thoughts are. Drop them in the comments. We'd like to know exactly what your thoughts are. Is there a remedy? Is there some miraculous cure to improve the malaise at Manchester United? I don't think there is, but do you? If you do, let us know. Right, that's enough about United. That's depressed many of you.
I was going to say, never mind, let us know. If they do have some ideas, they need to let Manchester United know as well.
Absolutely. I think it will be welcome, because Ten Hag obviously doesn't have a clue. Right, that's one club that is going nowhere. There's another club that
your segues are getting better, I must say.
Right, there's another club that seems to be 1 week it seems to have sort of turned a corner, and then another week it's taken a couple of steps back. That's Chelsea. A strange result at the weekend, because we when we discussed on the preview show, we thought that Chelsea were sort of getting it right in terms of performance, certainly in terms of stats. It was decent. It was okay, but in terms of result, a really poor result, a 2-0 loss against Brentford at home. What's your take on that?
I mean, there's going to be many Man United supporters that talk about how they'll be receiving a lot of the negative headlines compared to, let's say, Chelsea. I think Chelsea do get negative headlines, but Chelsea are not as big a club as Manchester United. So, I mean, that comes with the territory, right? But Chelsea, honestly, I think it's one to keep an eye on, because this is very interesting now in terms of the malaise that continues at that club as well. I mean, this week, I was following some of the reaction on social media from Arsenal fans. I mean, I felt last week that Arsenal were fortunate to get a point. And many Arsenal fans after the Brentford result were saying I knew we'd drop 2 points at Stamford Bridge. And fair enough, each game has its own construct, you know that. But in the end, Brentford, deservedly, I think, in the end, won the game. And what I mean by deservedly is ultimately the game's very simple. It's about scoring goals and it's about not conceding goals. And it sounds quite cliched, but that's the bit that Chelsea are finding the most difficult right now. I mentioned that this was the first game when an opposition team had a greater XG than Chelsea. It clearly shows they've got some issues with profligacy in front of goal. You saw Madueke, wonderful kind of cut inside, bang, hit the post. They had great opportunities and they asked lots of questions. But as is often the case with Chelsea, what they aren't is kind of solid at the back. And if you're solid at the back, you can attack with a bit more conviction and you can sustain those attacks. But there's this vulnerability, right? I mean, this is Brentford's third straight league win at Stamford Bridge. They've won more games at Stamford Bridge, Ayub, in the last 7 months than Chelsea have. Just let that sink in. They've won more games at Stamford Bridge in the last 7 months, Brentford, than Chelsea have. I mean, that is ridiculous.
That is, I didn't know. That I didn't know.
Exactly. And honestly, the home win against Luton being their kind of only win in 13 league games. That's Chelsea, that is. So I think, look, Brentford deserved winners. Chelsea, many issues, right? They had Fernandes injured. I think Mudryk was injured as well. But that's by the by when you're spending over £1 billion on kind of rejuvenating and renovating the squad and what have you. I think they've got 3 wins, 3 draws, 4 defeats, Ayub, in the league so far. They're already 11 points off the top 4, 14 points off Spurs. And look, would people have expected Chelsea to challenge for the title? Well, I mean, expectation is neither here nor there. Arsenal were not expected to challenge last year at the start, right? And they went on a magical ride. Similarly, this year, many wouldn't have thought Tottenham, especially after the sale of a superstar in Harry Kane, that they would be. And yet they, at the 10-game mark, which is a substantive sample size, they lead the Premier League and are unbeaten and clearly playing a brand of football that should hold them in good stead moving forward. So it can be done. This kind of idea that, we didn't really, we're building. Well, it's just a bit of a narrative and a cushion for managers to kind of lean on when times are not going so well. The fact of the matter is, I don't know what the expectations are of the Chelsea board. I think they would have expected a better start, mind. They don't strike me as the most patient bunch. Let's not forget they employed Graham Potter and then Julie fired him not so long afterwards. So it's not beyond the realm that if they don't improve, then there may well have to be a tough decision made in the summer. I don't see it, and I would be despondent if that was the case. But clearly, results is what matters. Now, Chelsea, they've also struggled this year it's the most obvious thing. They can't score enough goals, right? And I think when you look at this, the longer the game went on 0-0, I don't know what you thought, but I just had a feeling that Brentford probably gonna nick this, because that's been the story of Chelsea's season. And look at the defending for the first goal, so poor. How easy was it to get to the byline, one flicked cross, and Pinnock's the only one really wanting it. He comes in strong, on the rise. None of the Chelsea defenders could even see where he was, to be honest. It was a poor goal. And then the second goal is just comical, obviously, in the 94th, 95th minute, with 2 players running through on goal. So I think Chelsea are going to have to, you're going to have to start seeing progress sooner, there's one thing which is perhaps not winning games, but I think, it's important then to get a draw, not lose games, to keep some semblance of momentum. Look at Arsenal last week, in my opinion, very fortunate to get a draw, but somewhere through some resolve and some mentality, and maybe some of the vulnerability that Chelsea have, Arsenal dug out a draw, which is when you're not at your best, just try and scrap your way through, find something somewhere to just keep that momentum going. And I was grateful for the point, and Arsenal should be, because on the face of it, they weren't that good. Chelsea, you're right. They've had a bit of a scattered season, haven't they? They played well in the early parts of the season, showing quite a bit of promise, even though they weren't perhaps getting the results. And just when you think you're turning a corner, all of a sudden they have another negative setback. Again, testament to the point that I always make, which is the league's difficult. There's no such thing as easy wins, and every single week you have to show that commitment, and you have to show that, kind of that chemistry and that forging of patterns that I always speak about, and time again, and then you've earned the right to win the game. Chelsea aren't doing enough to earn the right to win some of these games, and that was my biggest concern heading into this season, how that lack of chemistry would affect them in games, and it's clear. Now, Nkunku's supposedly not too far away. That will be a big fillip for them, because he is a man who they bought in to score those goals. Jackson's going through a bit of a lean time. Let's see. Again, if I was Poch, I wouldn't be worried just yet, but they are in the second half of the table, I believe, and already, like I said, 11 points off the top four. I have to believe one of their aims this year, after spending such vast sums of money, was that they wanted to be back into the big time and into the Champions League. If they continue like this for another 5 or 6 games, they're going to find that an awful big mountain to climb. Right now, I can't see it, but it's still early in the season, so let's see. But again, I think when you've got, let's say, you've got Fernandes. He's unhealthy. He's obviously injured over the weekend, but you've got him and Caicedo in the middle of the park, both bought for over 100 million each. You're expecting them to be powerhouses. You should be solid as a unit with those two kind of in the middle. Yes, Fernandes' best position is perhaps an 8, but you've got to be a bit more kind of solid than what they are right now in terms of conceding chances. So I would be worried if I was a Chelsea fan, because I would have still hoped to have seen something that hasn't come to fruition in the early parts of this season, in terms of, again, developing a style of play that's consistent. Yes, against Arsenal, they were great, but there's one thing nullifying a good team like they did with Arsenal, and there's another to express yourself consistently over the course of 95 minutes to get yourself a positive result. It's that second, the latter, that's proving also difficult for Pochettino right now. So, yes, pretty horrendous result. And they've got some difficult games to come, Ayub. They play, I think, 5 of the top 8 soon, very soon. So it could get worse before it gets better. And normally when that happens, and you're manager of Chelsea Football Club, that's not a good place to be in. So they need some results, and they need them quickly, similar to Manchester United.
Is Poch under pressure? Of course he is. You don't manage Chelsea, and there's no pressure. There's expectation. But if I was compare a United fan and Chelsea fan, I think the Chelsea fan should be perhaps disappointed, but slightly more optimistic, because I think they've shown enough this season.
It's a low bar, It's a low bar.
It is, absolutely right. But there's been huge investment in that football club, and I keep on thinking. The first game of the season, I think it was Liverpool, weren't it? They played really, really well, and I think throughout the season as well, they've created opportunities. You're absolutely right. If you don't put that round thing in the net, you're seldom going to win games of football, because ultimately that's what it's about. But I think there's been enough there. Do I expect them to have done better? Absolutely, yes. You don't have that array of riches. You don't spend that sort of money, because in a sense, you spend money for immediate results. That's the whole point. If you spend 10 million on a player, you're looking at a future investment. If you spend 100 million, it's here and now. So from that point of view, absolutely, there is disappointment. But I think they've shown me enough, certainly, that it's not too far off. I think he needs to get absolutely right the combination. The team that he considers to be the strongest 12, 13, 14 players first. And then obviously then he could do the rotation. He's not going to have much time, because, as I said, you don't spend that sort of money and then sort of think, right, the first season, it's just to try and sort of see what my best formations are, what sort of systems are working. He needs to deliver something. I think he'll need to win something at least this year to placate some of the fans. And that's the way it should be. You don't spend that sort of money and think, right, the first season, we're just going to sort of see how things go. Absolutely not. But I'd be much more worried as a United fan than I would as a Chelsea fan. But that's not indefinite. That's not indefinite, because there's too much money spent on that Chelsea side. But I've certainly seen Chelsea play really, really well. I've seen them compete against the better teams. You say that they're going to have some tough fixtures. I think that the other teams will be saying the same. That, look, Chelsea are sort of not in the top half, or at least not in the top four, top five, top six, but they are a dangerous, dangerous side. So I think a lot of the other big clubs will not be taking Chelsea lightly. I think at the moment with United, they'd be absolutely sort of thinking, bring it on. We've got some whipping boys here to play.
Look, I think you mentioned about what the differences are, and it's important for us to just highlight those because it's two, on the face of it, it's two big clubs that lost at the weekend that are struggling, right? On the face of it. And the difference perhaps is we spoke about the performances at Manchester United. Only, like I said, Everton have a greater underperformance in terms of expected goals than Chelsea, which means that they're creating opportunities, they're just not finishing them. At the weekend, 17 shots, only 2 on target, Ayub. I mean, you've got to be working the keeper. And that just shows a general kind of malaise or lack of confidence in around the whole team. And you've got some new players there as well, right? Cole Palmer, Madueke, obviously Mudrik's in and out of the team. Conor Gallagher's still trying to establish himself. Caicedo's just coming in, but Caicedo, no Fernandes are known for goals and assists, are they? Fernandes, I don't think, has a goal nor an assist in the Premier League, I think, under Chelsea, especially this season anyway, for sure. The question is, the difference I would say on the other hand is, so although there might be some, relatively speaking, and this is what I meant about a low bar, relatively speaking, Chelsea may have a little bit more cause for optimism than, let's say, Manchester United, where there's a whole myriad of issues. The difference I would say is that where Manchester United, the owners won't necessarily make a hasty decision with regards to the removal of the manager in terms of applying pressure on the manager in terms of making sure he meets his aims and objectives. The Glazers have never really shown that, to be fair. They're more than happy for things to kind of slide and what have you. You saw that under Ole to some extent under his stewardship. Whereas with Chelsea, you feel that there is this kind of expectation from the sporting directors and from the board in terms of, hey, we've spent this money, we believe you're the right man for the job, and you do have our unequivocal backing. But do I think that, to your point, that's indefinite? Absolutely not, especially not at that club. And this is my point. Arsenal could go into free fall from this game onwards and finish 9th, yeah, hypothetically. Do you think there'll be one Arsenal fan calling for Mikel Arteta's sacking? No, and rightly so. For me, he's earned the credibility for us not to be even thinking about that. And that's the difference. Chelsea is a different animal. It's a very difficult job. Yes, you have riches on offer and you have great players. Who wouldn't want a central midfield where they're happy to spend over 100 million on Caicedo and 100 million on Fernandes and 80 million on Mudryk and bring these top class players in? But then that clock starts ticking about getting them playing in a certain way. Has Pochettino shown that he can do it in spurts? I think there's some signs there. But again, it's one thing stopping a team, a good team, a great team like Arsenal, and nullifying them and seeing that as some sort of moral victory, which, and again, I thought their tactics were spot on. I thought Arteta adjusted. But ultimately, the league's 38 games, and the way you kind of succeed over that kind of basis, over that duration, is to have a style that A, the players are comfortable in, but B, give you the best chance of winning week in, week out. So I also think he's striving and searching a little bit in terms of style and personnel. But I think he's at the one club where he's going to have to start getting that right. I don't think that if it was up to me, I would have no qualms. I don't care if they finish mid-table. I would stick with him because I think these things do take time. But do I think that's what the decisions would be from the Chelsea board going into the summer? If, again, a similar malaise continues for the rest of the year, I would not be 100% sure that that'll be the case. So I would worry if I was Chelsea as well. Like I said, you're right. Nobody's going to think to Chelsea, that team with that type of players, to say, well, that's going to be an easy ride, of course. But at some point, you are who you are, and they do have a slight soft underbelly. They shouldn't. They've got, I think, very good players, but you need a team. It needs to be a team and a team construct that ultimately wins games, puts games together, wins leagues. And right now, they are far from that outfit.
Well put. And that's more or less it for today's show. Is there any other talking points over the weekend that you'd like to pick up on?
I think well, we decided, didn't we, just to cover these two games for the time being. Hopefully, we'll shoot again in a couple of days because I know we're keen to cover some of the happenings at Bournemouth, Burnley, Bournemouth being your second club and what have you. But we'll be covering that a little bit, maybe just in a special feature. But no, I think that on the whole, that was it. Obviously, we'll do a little bit of a roundup perhaps in our next episode of the weekend games. As well. But on the whole, I think this was the most important talking point, especially the reaction from Old Trafford, which no doubt will continue heading into the next weekend's fixtures.
Yeah, and on that Bournemouth Burnley game, I was speaking to George over the weekend as well. He was busting a blood vessel. He was absolutely livid. And again, our old friend VAR gave us lots of talking points. So maybe we might just do a special on Wednesday. We'll introduce George back onto the show, and he could tell us exactly how he feels Burnley's season's going, the game, the decision. But that may be Wednesday. But
it's interesting when you say that he was bursting a blood vessel. I feel like both of you are kindred spirits. Now I know. Now I know why you're such good friends.
No, he's a gentle soul. He's a gentle soul. He's not like me at all. But it obviously is. As a football supporter, there are certain things that really, really great. And bad decisions, especially VAR. I mean, it's a bugbear of mine. I know it's a bugbear of yours every now and then as well. So it's something that really, even the most calmest of souls, it can infuriate. So it may be something that we shoot on a Wednesday. But before we go, let me do a little bit of the housekeeping, the usual stuff. I think the subscribe button is about sort of there. So please, if you haven't subscribed, click it. It will be great to have you on the Just Onside family. We've got our Twitter page as well, which is, I think, somewhere sort of there, Just Onside. We've got lots of followers and some really, really good stuff on there. I would really encourage you, Just Onside, sign up to our Twitter page. There's really good stuff. We've got Adam, who's excellent. He's a Liverpool supporter, so I'll just warn you, just in case, because they might be a little bit of featuring Liverpool, but he's really fair. He features all good stuff. On match days as well, he'll always put on the goals as they go in. So really, really good stuff. So as always, thank you. I hope you're all doing well. And until the next time, stay on side.